Hey everyone, this video is to show you how to make a graph once you have your data all analyzed, numbers crunched, and ready to rumble, put in your graph. So the most common graph we'll be making here in our chemistry class is an XY scatter plot, where the data points are just plotted as dots on a graph, and then we will fit all of that data to a trend line later. So we won't connect the dots until after the fact. And so that's the most common graph we will use, an XY scatter plot. You can see I've got a spreadsheet currently going, and this data can turn into a linear graph. And it turns out a linear version of this data is energy on the y-axis and 1 over wavelength on the x-axis. And notice these two columns are not side by side, but we can still graph them. And I'll show you how to do that when the two columns are not side by side. So we're going to go up here to Insert, and then we want our XY scatter, just the dots. Click there. And then I've got my blank graph, which I'm going to move over here so I can still see my data. Notice there's no data plotted yet because Excel doesn't know which data it would like me to use. Two options to pick the data. You can either click Select Data or right-click on your graph, Select Data. And right now there's no data being plotted. If you did see some numbers here, you can get rid of that data by just hitting minus and just basically clearing your graph completely. Just hit minus for each entry here to get to a blank slate. But now that I need to put data in, I'm going to hit the plus sign to tell Excel, here's my first graph I'd like you to make. And notice over here, we get to pick the X values and the Y values. So for the X values, we're going to click into this little cell here. I'm going to go to the far right, click on that icon to minimize this screen. And then I'm going to go highlight what numbers should be on the x-axis. And in this case, that's 1 over wavelength. Don't highlight the heading. Sometimes that confuses Excel. Just do the numbers. Click back on that square to then open up the window again. And then we're going to do the same thing for Y. And Y should be energy. Now, if you had a long column of data, you could just click and go about part way through and then stop and then open the window and notice, well, my X values went to 14 and I want my Y values to go to 14 also, rather than highlighting all the way down to the bottom. Hit OK, and there we have our graph with our plots pointed, X and Y. Double check that the scale makes sense and that you actually have those values for X and Y. But otherwise, there you've got your graph. And then in later videos, we'll talk about how to format this to make it pretty. But there you go. There's your start.